Hey, you guys, it's Heather, and welcome to this Facebook Live edition of answering one of the questions from our very own members of this Media Mavericks group. I am also going to be sharing this video out on other channels. So if you happen to see this on YouTube, or if you happen to see it on my blog, please join the free Facebook group, Media Mavericks, which is www.facebook.com/groups/Media Mavericks. And inside that group, which is a free group, we address questions like this all the time that relate to getting visibility for your business, to helping you build a wildly visible personal brand, and then also helping executives become that person who has the top 5 media in their industry on speed dial and has those lasting media relationships that do so much good to them from a career perspective, from a business perspective. You guys, becoming friends, forming relationships with media, with the influencers is the number one thing that you can do to just absolutely catapult your personal brand. You can spend all freaking day doing stuff like this, doing the Facebook Lives, and all it takes is for one media person to pick up that message and broadcast it and give you kind of that halo of endorsement we talk about so often, and your personal brand is just orders of magnitude stronger. So today we are addressing a question from a member of this group who asked, how do I get started doing broadcast? And it was such an interesting question that I decided to take it and run with it for today's live, because I talk an awful lot about getting that, the print coverage and getting on the news websites or the business websites, and the topical websites. I talk about getting in print. I talk about getting on podcasts. I don't get asked, hi Leanna, I don't get asked quite as often about getting on broadcast because it's just a little bit of a different level of commitment. I'm not going to say it's more difficult because it's really not. And as you're going to see, getting broadcast coverage, it's 90% of what we do when we're getting that print and that blog coverage. It's 90% of what we do when we're getting on a podcast. It just takes a little bit of some specialized stuff that we'll talk about a little bit later on in this live. So, hi, Omar. Let's go ahead and talk first of all about what you want to do if you're getting started with broadcast. So it all starts in the same place. It starts with knowing your brand. It starts with not just knowing your brand, but loving your brand and feeling your brand like soul deep. So it's that first step of work that we go through in the e-course or in the Quick Start Guide, both of which are available in this group or on heatherhawkins.live. It's saying, what problem do I solve and for whom do I solve it? That's the piece of your future-proof brand DNA that never changes, right? So it doesn't matter if you're teaching somebody how to do Facebook ads today. That's not part of your soul deep brand DNA. Your soul deep brand DNA has more to do with helping people be heard, helping people get their messages out, right? It's that emotional problem that you're solving for your target demographic that makes up your soul deep core future-proof brand DNA. And you have got to know that before you get started getting visibility for your brand, because the internet never forgets, you guys. And if you're out there today saying you're the internet, the Facebook ads expert, and then tomorrow you decide that you're really into chatbots, when the media goes to research you, they're going to be like, wait a minute, you've been like 5 or 6 different things. So can we get some alignment here, right? So I always encourage people before they start getting media awareness, they need to know what is that core deep, I am always going to help entrepreneurs and executives build wildly visible personal brands. It doesn't matter if I'm teaching you to do it through media exposure right now, or if I'm having you hire a skywriter and a sky blimp, in a couple of years from now. The problem that I solve and who I solve it for never changes. So step number 1, define that for yourself, set it, and do not forget it. Set it and live by it, right? Step number 2 is really diving deeply into your customer and saying, okay, so I now know who I'm solving problems for. I know what problems I'm solving for them. Where do they go to look for solutions to those problems, right? So your people might watch the Today Show every morning, but maybe they watch it because they want to know the weather and they're getting their kids ready for school, and they're not watching it in an engaged way. And they're certainly not watching it thinking about their business. Would it make sense for you to spend 6 months pursuing a placement on the Today Show? Now, one could argue that maybe, yeah, I mean, if you want to put it on your social media channel, you want to put it on your website. But when it comes to the core of, is the person that you want to reach watching that show looking for solutions to their problem? That's the kind of match that we're looking for. So I want you to prioritize your media outreach always in terms of, is the person I want to reach here looking for solutions? Are they ready to hear my message? Are they open to hearing my message, right? So once you understand what you do and who you do it for and where they're out there looking for solutions to those problems, you should come up with a really nice list of a couple of media outlets. You know, I like to tell people, you know, people who don't do this for a living, people who have day jobs, people who I want to be able to do this in like a half hour a day, I say, don't make it more than 5 at a time. Don't try and watch like a universe of media. Don't try to boil the ocean. Identify maybe those 5 places. And since today we're talking specific to, I just saw all of Omar's comments. Yes, a sky blimp. It's the future. It's the future of mass communications. So I want you to identify those 5. In this case, we're talking about broadcast. So let's identify those 5 places where you truly know that your customer is open to hearing your message. And here are the 5 places that I know that I can reach them. And then when you start watching those media outlets, you're going to come up with a list of topics that those media outlets care about right now. And what we're trying to do, and there's a worksheet on this in the e-course and in the Quick Start Guide, what we're trying to do is get those 3 concentric circles to overlap, which is, what does my customer really want to talk about? What am I awesome at talking about? Like, what's my zone of genius? And then where are the topics that media is talking about, and where do those 3 things overlap, so that you're only paying attention to those opportunities that have to do with what you're great at, and you're only paying attention to those topics that have to do with what your customer wants to know about. And then you're looking at media as kind of, okay, you know, what are the trends in the media space? Because it is so much easier to catch a trend and ride a trend and be a part of a trend than necessarily it is to try to build a trend and create a trend. Because coming from an agency background, we get hired a lot of times to try and create a trend for people. And I can tell you that the miss rate on that is relatively high. And I want you guys to get wins that feel easy. And I want you to get wins that work within the universe of all the stuff that you have to do within your business. So it doesn't make sense for you to be trying to shove a boulder up the hill, trying to prove a trend that's not already there. I would much rather have you catch a wave and ride it, right? So what you're going to end up with is basically a list of 5 media outlets, and then say, 5 or 10 topics that you know are core to your customer, that you absolutely have a point of view on. And then you're going to start looking at who within this media. And it becomes a little bit more difficult when we're talking broadcast, right? Because it's going to be a producer. It's not, you're not reaching out to like the news anchor who talked about the story for the thing. So you have to dive in one level deeper when it comes to broadcast coverage. So it's probably the producer at that nighttime news segment, or if you notice they're talking about it more on the 5 o'clock news versus the 4 o'clock news, or if you notice that there's a weekend show where they talk about it, it's identifying that producer. And I do actually, I reach out to the anchors sometimes as well. So I'll do a dual reach out, anchor and producer, to say, hey, really enjoyed this segment that Martha did on the 5 o'clock news. So it's Martha and the 5 o'clock news producer on the same email. So that's a place where broadcast is a little bit different. And then another place that I highly encourage you, because this is where I get most of my national broadcast placement for my clients, is there will often be a contributor. So whenever I have placed a client on the Today Show, I haven't gone through any of the Today Show producers. I've gone through Today Show contributors. So for example, the nutrition contributor to the Today Show, I've known her for a while. I've placed with her several times. So that's the easiest way to get in. There are also, for example, editors. The editor at Shape Magazine is on broadcast all the time. Much easier to get to that editor at Shape Magazine than it is really to try to contact a producer at the Today Show or something like that. So the point here is I want you to watch the shows that you want to be on. And if it's something more generic like Fox Business Channel or CNN or something like that, you need to watch a couple of shows. You need to understand what type of broadcast they're running. You need to understand what type of topics that they're covering. And since this part is maybe a little bit more wishy-washy, if you want to get in touch with me, if you get that point where you say, I know I want this segment, I want to reproduce this segment, I can help you reverse engineer that. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to come up with, who do you need to contact at this broadcast entity? How would my story show up? Because I can't tell you the number of times that I've had a client come to me and say, I want to be on the Ellen Show. And I said, oh, that's totally cool. Have you ever watched the Ellen Show? No. Okay, so what part of the Ellen Show do you want? The last time that it happened, honestly, you guys, it was for a reusable Ziploc bag. And I am all for reusable, reduce, reuse, recycle, all this kind of stuff. But I was like, so you truly believe that you have a place on Ellen? Can you tell me, like, where in the Ellen universe is your reusable Ziploc bag gonna play? I have placed product clients on the Ellen Show. I can tell you there's a pay for play opportunity that you can do where you give away a bunch of them and then make a donation and like do all this kind of stuff. But this is clearly not what this woman wanted. She wanted to be, she literally said, dancing next to Ellen holding a reusable Ziploc bag. That is not something that ever happens. So I want you guys to actually watch the media that you're pitching, to know that what you're pitching makes sense and has a place. I also have people say, I want to be on Good Morning America. It's okay. In what way? In what context? Like, how would you like to see yourself? Do you know that your people are watching Good Morning America? Because in a lot of markets, Good Morning America comes on after, if you're trying to reach CEOs and men in business specifically, they're not watching Good Morning America. They've probably already left the house. It's probably the wife that's watching Good Morning. So do you know that your person is actually there? And do you know that what you're pitching makes sense? Because those are going to be super important when we start making outreach to people. And then the next step in the process is, just like we do with print coverage and trying to get on a podcast, it's starting to form a relationship. So it's following that contributor on social media, or it's following, that anchor. A lot of the anchors now have news feeds where they're talking about on Twitter, like what they're covering and what stories they're doing, and if they're doing any feature pieces. So it's starting to build that relationship in the same way that we do. And then when we make introductions to broadcast media, we do have the opportunity to be a lot more to the point than we do with a blogger or with a podcaster. So right now I'm going to transition a little bit into some broadcast specific tips for you guys. So let's see, let me put these in order. Okay, so the most important thing to realize when you're doing a broadcast story is that the producer is going to need more than just you talking. So if you're talking about a trend, if you're talking about, products are tough, you guys. Let's cover products in another segment. The person that asked this question, I happen to know that she's a business coach and consultant. So she's an expert. So she's going to be that person who's providing expert point of view. But the media producers, broadcast producers are quite likely to come back to you and say, do you have any B-roll? Do you have somebody in my market who is doing this, who's using this? Is there some way that we can get some other kind of a visual to accompany you being on the program? So when we're thinking in a broadcast world, we always need to be thinking visuals. And we also, and I'll get to this in a minute, but local is a great place to start with broadcast. And so you want to be thinking about that local hook and what that local visual hook is. So we really need to be thinking visual, and we need to be thinking movement and all of that when we're talking about broadcast. So that's quite different from print. That's even quite different from podcast. The other thing that a broadcast producer is going to want to know is that you're legit, that you know how to talk on a camera, that you're not going to clam up, that you're going to be a good interview, that you're going to understand that this is not your opportunity to shill your product. So what they're going to want to see is a little bit of some proof of that. So that either means other broadcasts that you've been on, or it means you doing things like this, you doing Facebook Lives, you having a YouTube channel, you showing that you're able to put together a convincing and compelling sentence that the listeners are gonna, and the viewers in this case, are gonna be drawn to, right? So one of the best ways for you to build up your portfolio and get there is through local broadcast. I say the same thing when it comes to print. A local news show needs to come up with just as much content as the 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock hour on CNN does. And I guarantee that there are fewer people pitching to get into those spots, and there are fewer people with a specifically local angle. And you have that. You already have that into the producer of saying, I'm local, I'm right in your backyard. I can introduce you to Martha. I'm actually in the process right now of pitching somebody on the agency side of work that I do. And I live in the mountains. I live way up in the hills at 7,000 foot elevation outside of Lake Tahoe. Reno is my closest market. And I happened to cross paths with the television show producer the other day. And I have a client who show. And so I went out and I found a customer. I actually looked through the customer reports and I found somebody with the right zip code, and we're pitching him a local person who's willing to talk to him to give him that package. So when you're talking about broadcast, you really do want to think about that package. But again, local is a great way to start getting that portfolio put together, because when the Today Show comes knocking, when Oprah's Super Soul Sunday comes knocking, they're going to want to know that you're able to talk on camera and that you're going to be a compelling guest for them to have on their show. Another thing to keep in mind is that broadcast happens fast. You could pitch somebody. You could say, hey, I'm an expert in this area. I see that you cover this area. I'm local to you. I would love to be an expert next time anything happens within the space, or you have any needs within this space. They could call you at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and say, can you be down at the studio by 5 o'clock this afternoon to do a live setup? And you need to be ready to go. Nothing is worse than telling a broadcast producer, because honestly, broadcast works at such a fast speed. Nothing is worse than telling them you're an expert and you're available to them, and then having them try and get in touch with you and you're not available. Probably they will never call you again. So you just need to know, this is why I talk about the commitment of doing broadcasts. It means that you can't do questionable things with your hair color that you don't know how it's going to work out. It means that you can't really not be available, or it means that you can't have like a really clunky schedule. You just need to be a little bit more flexible when broadcast comes into play. So let's talk. So we talked about visuals. When you're first making outreach to that producer, again, remember that they're thinking in visuals and they're thinking fast, because a typical segment, a segment could be like 30 seconds versus the amount of time it takes somebody to read an email. So you need to understand the quickness and the speed with which broadcast works. So your subject line needs to be incredibly compelling. Michael, local expert, available to talk about, business trends, whatever, like something that is quick and is compelling, and is going to catch their eye. And then when you jump in this case, so when I know when I tell you guys to start developing relationships with print people, I say, hey, I've been following you for a while. I really enjoy what you wrote about that, and do the ego stroke. Broadcast people don't care about that so much. It's more, hey, I'm local to you. I notice you need locals. I'm an expert in this. Here are some bullet points, and bullet point it out. Don't tell that story. Don't, spend as much time, because honestly, news producers don't care about that quite as much as bloggers, podcasters, reporters, people like that do. So get to the point, and get to the point quickly, and front stack it. So journalists, I actually, one of my degrees is in journalism. We talk about the reverse pyramid, the inverse pyramid, which is, imagine if an editor came in with an actual razor blade, which is what happened late in, back when I went to college, and sliced off the bottom of your story, which your story still makes sense if it only had this part at the top, right? The stuff at the bottom is fluff. The stuff at the bottom doesn't really matter. Make sure that you are front loading that pitch so that it's like, what do they care about the most? I'm local to you. I can be at your studio in 5 minutes. I'm an expert on this. I've been featured on this, this, and this. Here are some topics I can talk about, right? And then let's talk a little bit about breaking news. So making yourself available for breaking news is a great way to get called up on a broadcast. So let's say you're an expert in tax law, and you make that relationship with somebody at your local news affiliate and say, hey, there's a tax law brewing in our state. It could come to fruition any second. Like, it's on the governor's desk. So knowing that these kinds of things are happening in your industry, right, are vastly important when it comes to broadcast. And saying it is sitting on the governor's desk. If it gets signed, if something happens with that law, I am 15 minutes away from your studio, and I am available to come in and talk to you about that. That kind of pitch will light a news producer's hair on fire, like absolutely 100%. So when you come up with that list of topics that you can speak on, some of them should be evergreen, but some of them really should be, what are the timely things happening in my space that could break? And if they break, the news is going to want to have somebody on who can speak on it and speak on it quickly. And you guys, that's actually the opportunity for you to start to get a leg up into some of the national news, is letting them know that you're available to speak on it. And, I've been featured on my local news. I am an expert in tax law. I could be on your program. If it breaks on a weekend, if it breaks on a holiday, and the usual people that they go to aren't there you are on CNN, right? And it's knowing those targets, it's knowing your topics, it's watching and listening and understanding where you're going to have a relevant place to talk to those producers and on that news broadcast is going to be hugely important. So that's some of the stuff about actually pitching and what you need to have in your arsenal to do the pitching. And then the other piece of it is just, again, going back to the beginning, it's knowing yourself, and it's knowing your messages, and it's knowing that if you are on broadcast television live and they ask you a question that you didn't want them to ask you, you have an answer prepared, and you know exactly what you're going to say, and you're confident in yourself. And a lot of that comes down to media training. A lot of that comes down to just knowing your messages and having done that core work. But if you're going to pursue a broadcast strategy, I really suggest you spend some time in media training and having somebody run you through, and having somebody put you in front of a camera and, just fire hose you with all those questions that you don't want to know, so that you're sure that you're not going to lose your cool, and you're sure that you're going to keep it together. Because, I have been on local news. I'm I was on ESPN once talking about a breaking news topic, and they asked me that one question that I didn't want them to ask me. And I was like, shoot. And I'm really well trained. I was like, shoot, but I hadn't specifically well trained for this one opportunity. And it is so vitally important that you be trained, because you don't want to be that person who kind of clams up or doesn't know exactly what the right answer is. So I do suggest, if you're going to pursue a broadcast strategy, that you get some professional help just to help you get all that stuff nailed down, and to give you some tips, and to give you some speaking tips and all that kind of stuff. So anyhow, you guys, that is today's segment on pivoting towards broadcast and using all of these skills and all of these techniques and hacks and frameworks that we're learning for getting broadcast coverage. If you have any questions, I do encourage you to post them down below, whatever channel that you happen to be watching this video on. Post them down below and I will get to them. If you're not already a member of Media Mavericks and you're seeing this video someplace else, I do encourage you to join that group on Facebook. Once again, it's www.facebook.com/groups/Media Mavericks. And that is a free group to join. And we do stuff like this every week, covering topics just like this one. So please join us. And if you have any questions on how to create your own radically visible personal brand, I encourage you to join us over there, or drop me a note, heather@elevation-strategy.com. And I'm happy to help you get started grabbing those headlines. Thank you so much. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.